Yet they extended the frontiers of human knowledge and experience. Creativity, it has been said, consists largely of rearranging what we know in order to find out what we do not know, observed George Keller. The concept of new is not universal or fixed in the definition. It is subjective and dynamic. Creativity deals in subjectivity and emotion. It puts us in touch with the variety in human existence. Divergent thinking may be defined in opposition to convergent thinking. Convergent thinking involves aiming for a single, correct solution to a problem, whereas divergent thinking involves coming up with multiple answers to a given problem. Thus, creativity may be understood as the opposite of logical or analytical thought. Daniel Pink, in his book A Whole New Mind, argues that we are entering a new age where we will need to foster and encourage right-directed thinking, representing creativity and emotion, over left-directed thinking, representing logical, analytical thought. Other phases to suggest creative thinking in current use are thinking out of the box, lateral thinking, and fluid intelligence. Originality and appropriateness in the definition indicate two features of the product of creativity. We will try and understand them by comparing various kinds of creativity. There are obvious differences between the Bunda and Picasso's painting. Appropriateness is essential for the success of the Bunada. The taste, the pricing, the shelf life of the ingredients. Similarly, the success of Hotmail is incumbent on the appropriateness of the technology. However, Picasso's art succeeds more due to its originality than its appropriateness. How works of art may sometimes flaunt their inappropriateness, their overturning of established conventions as the defining feature. Cedric considers originality paramount in art and literature and argue that in other fields like everyday life, industry, architecture and design, creativity is qualitatively different as appropriateness of the product is as important as originality. If we think more about it, we realize that the continuum of creativity actually stretches from interpretation to innovation in art and literature as well. Classical dance and music or acting, for instance, would rely more on interpretation than painting and literature, where there is greater scope to innovate or create new. But even in literature and painting, there are established genres that pull the practitioner towards the pole of interpretation. Alexander Pope is considered a great poet because he perfected the form of the heroic couplet in English poetry. Picasso too both interrupted and innovated within Cubism to attain his formidable reputation as the great modernist painter. Thus, looking deep within what is startling, new, and originally is an appropriate interpretation of the past and the present. Rather than look for a qualitative difference in kinds of creativity or prioritize one over the other, it would be far better for our purpose to conclude that the manifestations of creativity are different in different fields. Originality and appropriateness may sometimes go hand in hand. At other times, one may overtake the other, depending on the demands of the task at hand and the time and place. Creativity. J.P. Guilford pioneered the modern psychometric approach to creativity. Taking a cue from the Guilford group, many psychologists have developed tests to measure creativity. Although creativity is now accepted as an essential constituent of human intelligence, efforts to develop a reliable creativity quotient have met with little success. The preceding discussion should give us a clue as to why it would be next to impossible to measure creativity objectively and across cultures. As we have seen, creativity dwells in subjectivity and variety. There are many kinds of creativity, and the very definition of what constitutes a creative act is determined by its appropriateness to the context. Besides, most measures of creativity are dependent on the personal judgment of the tester, so a standardized measure is difficult to develop. However, it would be instructive to know what psychologists measure in order to assess creativity. It may help us recognize highly creative people and acts. Tests of free creativity may be scored on fluence, the total number of meaningful and relevant ideas generated in response to the test. Second, flexibility, the number of different categories of relevant responses. Third, originality, the rarity of the responses among the test subjects. Fourth, elaboration, the amount of detail in the response. Psychologists favor a social personality approach. To measure creativity, they assess personality traits such as independence of judgment, self-confidence, attraction to complexity, artistic orientation, risk-taking, and openness to experience. Another way to assess creativity is to look at its various dimensions. Besides originality and appropriateness that have already been discussed, other related dimensions like the following may also be studied as indicators of creativity. Intellectual leadership. Creative thinkers are able to create new and promising theories or existing trends which inspire others to follow. In essence, starting a movement, a school of thought, or a trend. Second, sensitivity to problems. The ability to identify problems that challenge others and open up a new field of thought is a mark of creative thinking. Third, ingenuity. Ingenious solutions that are able to solve problems in a neat and surprising way or reflect a new perspective of looking at the problem. Fourth, unusualness. Creative thinkers are able to see remote associations between ideas. When word association tests are given, people in highly creative literary fields like poets give a higher proportion of unique responses. Fifth, usefulness. Solutions or ideas that are also practical are considered more creative as the creator is able to meet the constraints of the problem while at the same time producing unusual and original solutions. The above is from psychological literature that deals with all kinds of creativity. Measuring creativity would be especially useful in industry and education. When we think of creative writing, the focus is slightly different from issues around recruitment or career choice. Though creative writing, we are aiming at artistic achievement, the discussion that follows and the examples henceforth will deal specifically with creativity in art and literature. Inspiration and agency. Inspire to infuse an animating, quickening or exhilarating influence into. Inspiration. First, an inspiring or animating action or influence. Second, theol, a divine influence directly and immediately existed upon the mind or soul of a man. Creativity, especially in art and literature, is often linked with inspiration. Definition number 1, explained as a cause of the effect. Creativity, the meaning of the word inspiration is easily understood. The problem arises in the theological definition number 2, where a superior human agency is assumed and is carried over into art and literature. The question that arises then is, if inspiration comes from a divine source, then are not human will and efforts irrelevant? And all who heard should see them there, and all should cry, "Be aware, be aware." His flashing eyes, his floating hair, weave a circle around him thrice, and close your eyes with holy dread, for he on honey-dew had faith, drunk the milk of paradise. This is Coleridge's description of the divinely inspired poet whom everybody regards with awe. It is not up to the writers of this book to discount divine inspiration, just as it is not up to them to challenge the existence of God. It would be sufficient to point out that Coleridge, the English Romantic poet, spoke in the idiom of the 19th century, and that with the secularization of life in the 20th and 21st century, artists and writers have relocated inspiration to various other quarters, childhood experiences, works of other writers and artists, conscious or unconscious motivation, etc. There is in the present time the strong conviction among a significant section that inspiration may be sought, fostered, and learned rather than merely awaited. Consciousness was not completely absent in the 20th century. Wordsworth, Coleridge's friend and the most famous of the English romantics, looked to nature for inspiration. Thanks to the human heart by which we live, thanks to its tenderness, its joy and fear, to me the meanest flower that blows can give, thoughts that do often lie too deep for tears. Although the human heart is prioritized in this poem, Wordsworth invested nature with inspiring powers. Inspiration might have been sought deliberately, but it was still a matter of mystical communication between the poet and nature. Modern poetry tends to be more self-reflective. The most important and perhaps the most quoted line in the Welso-Stevens of modern poetry is the first wrapping onto the second. The poem of the mind in the act of finding what will suffice. Of modern poetry. Poem of the mind in the act of finding what will suffice it has not always had. To find. The scene was set. It repeated what was in the script, then the theatre was changed. To something else, its past was a souvenir. It has to be living, to learn the speech of the place. It has to face the men of the time and to meet the women of the time. It has to think about war, and it has to find what will suffice. It has to construct a new stage. It has to be on that stage, and like an insatiable actor, slowly and with meditation, speak words that in the delicate ear of the mind, repeat exactly that which it wants to hear, at the sound of which an invisible audience listens, not to the play but to itself expressed in an emotion as of two people, as of two emotions becoming one. The actor is a metaphysician in the dark, twinging an instrument, twinging a wiry string that gives sounds passing through sudden brightness, holy, containing the mind below which it cannot descend, beyond which it has no will to rise. It must be the finding of a satisfaction, and maybe of a man skating, a woman dancing, a woman combing, the poem of the act of the mind. The poem of the act of the mind has to think and find what will suffice. Not only has the focus shifted from the poet to the poem, but also the purpose and agency are underscored as essential features of poetry. Are we saying that modern poetry has stolen away all the awe and mystery associated with the poet? Creativity of the modern poet at a more pedestrian level than that of the one who on honeydew had feet. Even this poem of the mind generates the following image of creativity. The actor is a metaphysician in the dark, twanging an instrument, twanging a wiry string that gives sounds passing through sudden brightness. It seems that no matter how close one might get to a rational explanation, creativity still seems to have a component that defies description and goes beyond the analytical mind. As it should be, as creativity is a product of divergent thought and is both subjective and original and geared to extending knowledge, We may conclude this discussion by interfering that inspiration refers to that element in creativity that is not completely understood by analytical thought. Tendency has been to demystify the process of creativity, and psychological literature of the 20th and 21st century provides valuable insight into the play of the conscious and unconscious motivation of the creator. One might sometimes complain that far from rejecting a pura human agency, the 20th century has created a new god for itself. Just as ancient and medieval thinkers traced creativity to God, too many modern intellectuals explain away creative acts as arising from the subconscious mind of the artist. E.H. Lawrence's novel Sons and Lovers is often read and discussed as the expression of the Oedipal complex. If Coleridge was seen as possessed, is not Lawrence's agency also undermined by seeing the novel only as a play of subconscious motivation? However, the conscience in the present time seems to be that even though the process of creativity may not be fully understood by the creator, even though inspiration may play a significant role, agency, human will and effort cannot be undermined in the act of creation. Stephen Stuckey, a well-known composer, explains his creative process in the following words. In my line of work, I often hear myself described as a creative person, yet I identify much more readily with those working stiffs who slung it out down in the trenches day in and day out. Thomas Edison and his 5% inspiration, 95% perspiration, with Paul Hindemith, the great German composer, who when asked where he got his ideas, simply held up his pencil with Sir Harrison, the best English composer of our day, an authentic genius and gruff, no-nonsense bloke who, when asked by an interviewer some high-flown question about making art, replied, "What preoccupies every working artist is simply how the hell you do it." For me, composing means long, hard, unglamorous hours spent with pencil and paper and especially eraser, trying by hook or crook to tease something from nothing. It is not as though Stuckey discounts inspiration totally. He acknowledges creative artists from other fields whose masterpieces often spark his own work. He especially mentions the sly, lapidary pose style of Nabokov, which sparked my 1980 composition, Transparent Things. It's the brilliant textures and finely judged juxtapositions of sequency which forms a backdrop for my own Sun Lumina of 1988. It is the humane lyrical voice of poet Archie Amonis who inspired my 1992 song cycle, Four Poems of A.R. Emmons, Creativity and Resistance. And now we have inferred that creativity, being a profitable human attribute, usually benefits society perceptibility and improves the quality of life. We may go on to assume that creative acts are always celebrated. That would be to overlook the subversive potential of creativity. As creativity involves the imagination and reaches out towards what is new and original, it is by definition unconventional. It can challenge the norms and modes of society, upset the status quo and redistribute power. So very often authorities and power centers feel threatened and end up persecuting creative people. The author Ayn Rand observed the man who invented fire was probably burned at the stake. Closer to home, on Jan 1, 1989, Safadar Hasim was chased by lathi-wielding political goons in Sahibada and beaten to death. His only crime was that he was performing a play Halla Bol in support of striking industrial workers. Salman Rushdie's novel Static Verses raised a veritable storm of protest, and a fact was issued against the author for an irrelevant depiction of the pro- prophet. The painter M.F. Hussain was simply threatened for his controversial depiction of Hindu goddesses. Filmmaker Deepa Mehta's Fire was attacked for its taboo theme of liberalism. Her film Water could not be shot in India because a certain section objected to her portrayal of the plight of Hindu widows. Artists mentioned above may not have deliberately or consciously intended to challenge established power structures, but there are scores who have been very direct in their criticism. Dalit writers like Daya Pawar and Om Prakash Valmiki against caste operations in India, black writers in the USA against racism, Chernyavsky and others against Russia, Milind Kundra against the community regime in Czechoslovakia, not most recently Nobel laureate Orphan Pamuk against Turkish politics, to name but a few. Most have had to face persecution in some form. Above examples go to establish that creative expression has the potential to challenge the status quo and bring about a change in society. Those who threaten and pre-execute creative people are usually beneficiaries of the system and are interested that things remain as they are. They seek to inhibit creativity in various ways. Censorship that involves banning of books and government control over art and literature has been found to be inimical to creativity, and so has the control of big and powerful capitalist institutions. Evolved and aware societies have to constantly come up with ways to protect freedom of expression. Sometimes it may mean that creative artists collectively resist attempts to stifle expressions. In 2001, the rich and powerful Mitchell Trust tried to stop the publication of a first novel by an African-American writer parodied the classic bestseller Gone with the Wind. Ever since it was published in the 1930s, it has continued to hurt the sensibilities of the African American community by its stereotypical portrayal of black characters. In 2001, a young African American writer, Alice Randall, finished writing its parody The Wind Done Gone, in which she gave voice and subjectivity to Margaret Mitchell's cardboard characters. The Mitchell Trust swept down and attempted to prohibit the publication of this novel. A number of writers, a lot of them African Americans but many whites, came together to oppose the move. We reproduce here portions from a news time quoting the famous African American writer and Nobel laureate Toni Morrison as she makes a strong case in favor of Alice Randall and in opposition to white racism. Morrison argues in favor of artistic rights and praises Randall's efforts of attempting to assuage the historical damage done to the African American community in the USA. Considering the First Amendment rights properly accorded Gone with the Wind, in spite of the pain, humiliation, and outrage its historical representation has caused African Americans, it seems particularly odd for the Mitchell estate to deny this clever but gentle effort to assuage the damage gone with the wind has caused. That it has as legal redress does not seem to have embarrassed it. She continues. To crush the artistic rights of an African American writer seems to me not only reckless but arrogant and patriotic. In the same news item, Motion also makes an important literary point about the difference between plagiarism and inspiration. The wind done gone neither follows nor copies nor exploits gone with the wind. What Miss Reddle's book does is imagine and occupy narrative spaces and silences never once touched upon nor conceived of in Mrs. Marshall's novel. As to the form and quality of Miss Randall's novel as it relates to charges of theft and subliteracy, her book is written in the form of a diary discovered among the papers of a deceased woman, a form with precedents far older than the novel genre. And propaganda. Some critics argue that true creativity should not be tainted by politics or causes, as true art is universal. In practice, it would be very difficult to reject works only because they are associated with causes. Arthur Miller's drama is considered left, as is Pablo Neruda's poetry. Toni Morrison argues that the cause of African American women in novel after novel, all four are noble literates and their works are indisputably art. The concept of universal art, that is of and above causes, has been challenged repeatedly in the present times. What used to be called universal perhaps expressed the value of the dominant section of society. Creativity is always subjective, which is not to say that all art is propaganda or that there is no difference between art and propaganda. We call a work of art propaganda irrespective of what it says if artistic considerations are compromised because of ideology. However, merely ascribing motives or politics to the creator does not take away from the creativity of the work. Resistance to established norms is in fact a valuable function of creativity, one that is cherished by the underprivileged all over the world. However, merely ascribing motives or politics to the creator does not take away from the creativity of the work. Resistance to established norms is in fact a valuable function of creativity, one that is cherished by the underprivileged all over the world. Creativity and madness. We know that creative people are unusual. In the above section, we discussed how they might sometimes be regarded with suspicion, even deride and persecuted. That is not all. There is also a more subtle way in which they are constantly marginalized. People often accuse them of being impractical, dreamy, and cut off from reality. It is no coincidence that from time immemorial, side by side with being defied and divinely inspired, creative people have also been compared with lunatics. There's immortal words, the lunatic, the lover, and the poet are of imagination all compact. Shakespeare ascribes the propensity to hallucination to all three. One sees more devils than vast hell can hold. That is the madman. The lover, all as frantic, sees Henry's beauty in a brow of Egypt. The poet's eye, in a fine frenzy rolling, doth glance from heaven to earth, from earth to heaven. As imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown, the poet's pen turns them to shapes and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. And as imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown, the poet's pen turns them to shapes and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. The, thus, we see that imagination in all three cases is accused of creating a wedge between the individual and society. This point of view is not restricted to literature. A lot of psychological research has been dedicated to find a correlation between creativity on the one hand and psychotism, bipolar disorder on the other. Psychological studies of highly creative people have shown that many have a strong interest in apparent disorder and imbalances which seem to be perceived as challenges. However, we must not draw hasty conclusions from the findings of such research. There may be a positive correlation between creativity and certain pathological traits, but that correlation does not establish an ingredient of abnormality in creative acts per se, nor does it suggest that creativity is abnormal. Psychologists, anyway, no longer use the concepts of normal and abnormal as watertight compartments in the study of personality. Human traits are studied on a continuum. Social variables too are recognized as playing an important role in determining what is considered normal or abnormal behavior. Creativity may be seen to deal with pathology only to the extent that it is unconventional, but unlike pathology, creativity is positive in its manifestations. Since appropriateness is an essential ingredient of creativity, meaninglessly destructive acts, even if masquerading as social change or pointlessly unconventional acts, would not be classified under creativity. The march of human civilization from the Stone Age to the Cyber Age would have been impossible without creativity. We may conclude that creativity is necessary and essential for humankind, even though it upsets the apple cart now and then. What is creative writing? While discussing creativity in art and literature, we have already noted many examples from creative writing. In this section, we will try and work out which kind of writing comes under the umbrella term creative writing. Creative writing is associated with originality of thought and expression. A gloss on creative in Oxford Advanced Learner's Dictionary of Current English, 6th edition, explains creative writing as writing stories, plays, and poems. Defining the term, however, is not easy, as the adjective creative and our preceding discussion of creativity imply creative writing is of many different kinds. It would be difficult to trace a common source in them and next to impossible to deem other genres of writing non-creative per se. Some sources attempt to distinguish creative writing from technical, professional, and journalistic writing on the basis of the primacy of imagination. Imagination is central to forms like poetry, drama, fiction, screenwriting, and self-exploratory writing. Other sources include imaginative non-fiction, writing for children, reviews, anecdotes, and editorials also as form of creative writing. We can see that there is an overlap, whereas some sources consider journalistic writing non-creative. Others put only reporting under non-creative, but editorials and reviews are considered forms of creative writing. Academic writing, too, depending on its kind, may be classified under either category. Some educational material is highly creative, whereas in writing a book on math, the author might keep strictly to facts and figures. Creative is a much bigger category than non-creative as far as writing is concerned. Only those works that purport to keep out imagination and subjectivity are non-creative. But facts too may sometimes be conveyed by using language creatively. A book on maths may be brought out in an extremely imaginative format. Nevertheless, non-creative is an important category as there is sometimes need to put down things exactly as they are, without embroidery. In reporting a murder, a police inspector may need to strictly keep imagination out and aim at objectivity. We may conclude that rather than being separate genres, creative and non-creative refers to the purpose of different kinds of writing. As far as writing technique goes, there is a fair amount of overlap between both categories. Principles of form and structure are similar in both imagination and writing. We have seen that imagination is central to the concept of creative writing. Literally, imagination means the action of imagining or of forming mental images or concepts of what is not actually present to the senses. Thus, imagination reaches out towards the new and the original. Is there a way of training people to be more imaginative? There is a view that formal schooling stifles innate imagination. The schoolboy. I love to rise in a summer morn when the birds sing on every tree, the distant huntsman winds his horn, and the skylark sings with me. Oh, what sweet company! But to go to school in a summer morn, oh, it drives all joy away. Under a cruel eye outworn, the little ones spend the day in shining and dismay. Ah, then at times I drooping sit and spend many an anxious hour, nor in my book can I take delight, nor sit in learning's bower, borne through with the daily shower. How can the bird that is born for joy sit in a cage and sing? How can a child when fears annoy but drop his tender wing and forget his youthful spring? Oh, father and mother, if birds are nipped and blossoms blown away, and if the tender plants are stripped of their joy in the springing day by sorrow and careless dismay, how shall the summer arise in joy, or the summer fruits appear, or how shall we gather what gifts destroy, or bless the mellowing ear when the blast of winter appear? Imagination and poetry during most of the 19th century was supposed to dwell with naturalness. Children, peasants, gypsies, all who had not been corrupted by civilization were prioritized as repositories of natural wisdom. Poets concisely modulate themselves after them, and poetry was linked to the song of the nightingale and the skylark. Keats observed that if poetry comes not as naturally as the leaves to a tree, it had better not come at all. Almost 200 years later, we still have not completely rejected the notion of naturalness being an essential attribute of literature, and this is the reason we distinguish between writings that need formal training, research, or factual information and creative writing. There is considerable merit in locating creative writing with naturalness rather than with specializations. Marginalized sections of society, the underprivileged and the exploited can make their voices heard effectively through stories, poems, novels, dramas, and autobiographies. They may not have access to expensive or elite education, so they may not be able to occupy the valorized positions in society, but every day can tell a story. However, the concept of naturalness should not be taken to undermine the importance of will and agency. Everybody may be able to tell a story, but the telling requires sustained effort. It is interesting that many women in the 19th century in India used autobiography to liberate themselves from the chains of tradition. Rasundari Devi attained fame for writing her autobiography at a time when women were actively discouraged from reading and writing. Learning to read and write certainly did not come as easily as leaves to a tree to her. Ame Zeben describes the painful process by which she recalled the oral lessons she had overheard as a child and matched them with the written words of the book that she would stealthily remove from the shelf after the men of the household left for work. Please God, teach me how to read. If you don't, who else will? I prayed constantly, thinking that even if I tried hard and somebody was willing to teach me, where was the time? I got discouraged. But then I thought, of course I will. God has given me hope. Encouraged, I kept that sheet to myself, held it in my left hand while I cooked, and glanced at it through the sari, which was drawn over my face. But I could not identify the letters. I decided to steal one of the palm leaves on which my eldest son practiced his handwriting. One looked at the leaf, another at the sheet. A comparison with the letters I already knew, and finally a verification with the speech of others. That was the process I adopted for some time. Furtively, I would take out the sheet and put it back promptly before anybody could see it. Conditions of an open field. Theoretically, imagination belongs equally to everybody. It is not the preserve of the highly literate and the privileged. Creative writing may bypass technical training and academic discipline, and as we have discussed, at times it is just as well that it does. What does it take to become a writer? Can anybody wake up one summer morning and say, "From today I am a writer"? Let's take the example of the following advertisement on the net for a course in creative writing that suggests the kind of person who has the potential to write. Do you like to write? Does answering letters come naturally to you? Do you often note down anecdotes or scraps of verse or dream up plots for stories? Do you enjoy rewriting or improving experiences in your mind? Do you make up conservations or descriptions? Can you forecast what a character in a soapy serial is going to say or do next? If an acquaintance has an adventure, do you imagine it in detail? Do you think about how you would have reacted if it had been you? Do you think about other ways it might have turned out? Do you fall in love with book characters? Do you sometimes find them stiff or wooden? No other qualifications except reading books and watching serials have been suggested as essential prerequisites for becoming a writer. If this is the case, then becoming a writer must be the easiest thing in the world. Natila Goldberg 2001, a famous teacher of creative writing, recounts, a student in a workshop walked up to me swinging his briefcase. "Hi, I am an engineer. I make $46,000 a year. How long do you think it will take me to earn that much with writing?" "Keep your job," I told him. Now I think if that student comes again, I will screech in blood-curdling syllabus. No advances, no assurances, no credentials, no merit. Know that you will eventually have to leave everything behind. The writing will demand it of you. Barebone, you are on the path with no markers, only the skulls of those who never made it back. Must not assume that just because creative writing is associated with imagination and naturalness, it is child's play. No published writer would deny that creative writing needs extraordinary intensity and perseverance. The 5% inspiration and 95% precipitation formula mentioned earlier in the section, inspiration and agency holds good for most writers. Some writers complain that precisely because it is a non-specialized field, writing takes over lives as no other profession. Creative writing imposes rigorous discipline on the practitioner. The kind of discipline may differ from writer to writer, but we may be sure that ultimately writing demands that the writer attains a super specialization of his or her own making by leaving everything that was known behind. Can creative writing be taught? If the discipline of creative writing is different for everybody, what is it that we are trying to do in this course? The debate whether creative writing can be taught at all is not new and has raged in various fora since the setting up of the first writing school in the pre-war years. Practically every US university now offers creative writing courses at various levels, and starting with the University of East Anglia in 1970, many British universities also teach creative writing. In India, IGNOU offers correspondence courses and JNU occasionally offers a course in creative writing at the postgraduate level. It would be interesting to find out what such courses achieve. First of all comes the question whether creative writing schools actually produce writers. Responding to the charge that not many who go through these courses actually go on to get published. Richard France explains. You can't judge a course simply by the number of publishable authors it produces. You don't judge history or English courses by the number of history or English academics they produce. Obviously, it's great when people go on to achieve within the discipline, but often the course is about giving people the creative and analytical skills they can use in other areas of their life. Do the students who do get published acknowledge writing schools? Anna Davis, a published novelist, observes in the same article, it also taught me how to read and edit my own work. You could argue that I would have got there anyway, but the concentrated time span certainly accelerated the process. Generally, the answer to the question whether creative writing can be taught is both no and yes. Creative writing courses may not be able to create a writer, but they can definitely help identify and earn writing skills. They can make students start off on the course of writing and to write better and faster than they would have otherwise. Importance of reading. What do you need in order to become a writer? My reply is always the same. Read, especially in your genre, listen deeply, and of course, write. Why are so many people surprised by this answer? If we had asked a coach, how do you become a basketball player? We did expect him to reply, know the game inside out, study players, stay in good shape, practice. But with writing, we seem to leave common sense behind. I could say, Eat two croissants a day, collect spiders, and hope your old aunt leaves you money. And people would note, affirmed in their belief that writing is a profound and mysterious thing. If there is consensus about anything as far as creative writing goes, it is the absolute essentialness of not just reading, but reading in a way that cracks open the writer's craft. Students who are beginning to write often begin with assuming that as writing is about originality, they do not need to go into the works of other writers. Some even argue that they deliberately do not read in order to protect their pristine creativity. Nothing can be further from the truth. We have already discussed that to be creative requires appropriateness along with originality. In art and literature too, there is the pole of interpretation along with innovation that approximates what we call appropriate elsewhere. The writer needs to interpret what has been written before. Interpretation does not mean being derivative, it implies intimate knowledge of other works. This would be equally essential if the writer is choosing to experiment. Paul Mills observed, one of the pleasures and aims of reading is to learn something more about how to write. I see writers as researchers of their craft experiments who learn most from practice, but who also know and understand what other writers have done and how they operate. Language or the raw material of creative writing too has to be learned from other writers. From time immemorial, writers have been advised to go beyond the dictionary meaning. It is the way words are used that gives them special significance. Practitioners of creative writing quickly realize the importance of words. In the following extract, dating back to the 12th century, the first-rate poet is seen to undertake a deep exploration within language. The speech of first-rate poets streaming forth that sweet content reveals clearly their extraordinary genius, which is as unearthly as it is ever bright. It is not understood by a merry learning in grammar and in dictionary. It is understood only by those who have an insight into the true significance of poetry. That meaning and that rare word which possesses the power of conveying it only those to deserve the careful security of the first-rate poet. Summary: creativity is a mental process involving the generation of new ideas or concepts, or new associations between existing ideas or concepts. The products of creative thought, sometimes referred to as divergent thought, usually have both originality and appropriateness. Although creativity is now accepted as an essential constituent of human intelligence, efforts to develop a reliable creativity quotient have met with little success. Inspiration refers to the element in creativity that is not completely understood by analytical thought. Even though the process of creativity may not be fully understood by the creator, even though inspiration may play a significant role, agency cannot be undermined in the act of creation. Creativity has supervisive potential. It can challenge the norms and modes of society, upset status quo, and redistribute power. We call a work of art propaganda if the artistic considerations are compromised because of ideology. Merely ascribing motives or politics to the creator does not take away the creativity of the work. Creativity may be seen to dwell the pathology only to the extent that it is unconventional, but unlike pathology, creativity is possessive in its manifestations. Some sources distinguish creative writing from technical, professional, and journalistic writings on the basis of the primacy of imagination rather than being separate genres. Creative and non-creative refer to the purpose of different kinds of writing. There is a view that formal schooling stifles innate imagination. There is considerably merit in locating creative writing in imagination and naturalness rather than in specializations. Marginalized sections of society, the underprivileged and the exploited, can make their voices heard effectively through stories, poems, novels, drama, and autobiography. Creative writing imposes a rigorous discipline on the practitioner. Creative writing courses may not be able to create a writer, but they can definitely help identify and hone writing skills. They can make students start off on the course of writing and to write better and faster than they would have otherwise. If there is concern about anything as far as creative writing goes, it is the absolute essentialness of not just reading, but reading in a way that cracks open the writer's craft. Language, we may master its grammar and assume that we know the language. But does grammatical accuracy guarantee that we communicate our ideas, thoughts, and feelings, whether spoken or written, with force and beauty? No, we often say that words began as an attempt to project the pictures in our mind. So when we write, we are in a sense painting with words. What we need to learn is that artistic creative writing is craft, and one of the tools that can help the writer is the knowledge of the tropes and figures of speech that exist within the language. Both a trope and a figure of speech can be understood as a departure from literal language as figurative language. There is a distinction between them. While tropes are regarded as figures of thought that change the meaning of words by turning their sense, figures of speech, also called schemes, merely involve a certain expression of words in a manner intended to impact the audience or reader. These devices only rearrange the usual order of words. Thus, while metaphor, simile, metonymy, irony, personification, hyperbole, etc. can be called tropes, emphasize, charmus, apostrophe, etc. can be called figures of speech. Yet another category of figures is referred to as figures of sound. These achieve emphasis by a repetition of sound as an alliteration, assonance, consonant, etc. What the student needs to pay attention to is whether the figure of speech is being used to illustrate an idea or enrich meaning. Word figure means primarily the form or shape of an object. When we refer to a fine figure of a person, we comment on the distinctiveness of the person's action and personality, which makes him or her stand out. Similarly, in language, tropes and figures of speech present a departure from a dull, ordinary way of expression by using more creative modes of communication. They make an idea more understanding. Just as one kiss from the princess changed the frog into a prince in that well-known fairy tale we read our children, the appropriate use of tropes and figures of speech can transform the nature of a piece of writing. The poetic, dramatic, the real, the popular, the heroic, the humorous, the preservous are only a few of the efforts that can be achieved through the correct usage of tropes and figures of speech. Knowing these is just a form of empowerment in that they help you to be confident about your creative expression. Since the beginning of literary expression, writers have embellished their work with figures of speech. While it is difficult to list all the figures of speech Available to the contemporary writer, some of the more frequently used ones have been defined here. We have classified them along certain cluster headings depending upon their destructive features. Figure of speech based on similarity, metaphor, simile, homonym based on association, metonymy, allusion, and symbol based on difference, emphasis, paradox, oxymoron based on word building, charmus, acronyms based on extension of ideas, personification, hyperbole based on obliqueness, irony, ambiguity, and fun based on utterance, alliteration, assonance, consonants, and homophones. Figures based on similarity, metaphor, Greek meaning a carrying over, two different things or ideas are fused together and one thing is described as being another. All its associations are thus also carried over. It is a figure of speech in which two dissimilar things are compared but only through implication. For example, to refer to a woman as that tigress or say that she is a tigress is metaphorical. If we say she is like a tigress, we would be using a simile. This is explained later. Metaphors appear not just in the noun but also in the verb as well as adjectival forms. One of the most popular quoted examples of metaphorical use are the lines from Shakespeare's As You Like It. All the words stage and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. Again, it may be used in the form of a long idiomatic phrase such as a hard nut to crack, a bird's eye view, and a dog-eared book, because metaphors are able to create new and interesting combinations of ideas. Object and sensations, they are used most effectively by writers, especially poets. However, metaphors also form part of our everyday speech, as for example, when we say the tail end of the conversation, say the tail end of the conversation. Since these pass unnoticed, they do not carry a strong metaphorical element and so are called dead metaphors. Simile. Simile-like metaphor is a means of comparing things that are essentially different. The distinction is that in simile, the comparison is explicit and is expressed by the use of some word or phrase such as like, as, then, similar to, resemble, or seems. For example, in a poem such as Harmony by Longstick Hugs, 5 out of the 6 images are similes. Doesn't dry up like a resin in the sun or fester like a sore and then run. It stink like rotten meat or crust and sugar over like a syrup sweet. Maybe it just sags like a heavy load or does it explode? P.G. Wodehouse used similes with panache to achieve some rally comic efforts. Consider the following lines from Uncle Fred in the springtime. The door of the drone's club swung open, and a young man in form fitting tweeds came down the steps and started to walk westwards. An observant passer by scanning his face would have finished that he discerned on it a lean, tense look like that of an African hunter stalking a hippopotamus. Homonym. It refers to a word that has two or more different meanings and derivations. For example, the word pitch, which means through and tar, or date, which means a calendar date, the fruit named date, and a Colonialism for two people going out together. Fumes make use of hormones, and so often hormones generate not just complexity but also humor. Look at some of these funny rhymes that make use of hormones. Of all the felt I ever felt, I never felt a piece of felt which felt the same as that felt when I first felt the felt of that felt head. The two meanings of felt here are the past tense of the verb fell, a thick soft material. Following rhyme, there are four roles offered by the word bob: your bob, our bob, bob as the old British coin shilling, and bob as a punch. Your bob owes our bob a bob. If your bob does not give your bob the bob your bob owes your bob, our bob will give your bob a bob in the eye. The context is British. Can you find an equivalent? Based on association, metonymy. In this figure of speech, the name of a thing is replaced by the name of an attribute of it or something else closely associated with it. For example, when we say from the cradle to the cradle stands for birth and the grave for death. One of the most popular metonymic saying is the pen is mightier than the sword. That is, writing is more powerful than warfare. A word used in such metonymic expressions is sometimes called a metonymy. Metonymy is distinguished from metaphor in that metonymy involves establishing relationships of continuity between two things and thus it works by planar logical relationships, while a metaphor establishes relationships of similarity between two things. For example, Rachel D. Cuso says in Metonymy or the husband's revenge. A literally cigarette had scolded me because my hero went out into the night chest unbuttoned. What deplorable nonsense, wrote this eminently sensible gentleman. Why does she not say what she means? Obviously, it was his shirt that was unbuttoned, not his chest. And Roch, this figure of speech is very similar to metonymy in that both substitute some significant detail or aspect of an experience for the experience itself. In a synecdoche, something is indirectly referred to by naming only a part or constituent of it to describe the whole of it. For example, when T.S. Eliot says in The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, I should have been a pair of rich claws skulking across the floors of silent seas. He is speaking about the crab. The effect of a sandwich in writing is thus somewhat like a cartoon. It creates an immediate visual picture of the most prominent aspect of something. Again, in the poem The Naked and the Nude, Robert Graves says, lovers without reproach will gaze on bodies naked and
The Hippocratic eye. In these lines refer to a doctor allusion, Latin meaning to play with, to touch lightly upon. An allusion in a literary work is a means of suggesting far more than is said by reference to something outside of itself. This could be of history, literary tradition, legends, personages, autobiographical details, etc. It relies upon the leader's familiarity and recognition of what is being mentioned so that the necessary connections are made. Topical allusions refer to contemporary happenings. Personal allusions refer to the author's own life, etc. Imitative allusions are made use of in parody, and in structural allusions, one work reminds the reader of the structure of another. Allusions help to reinforce the emotion or the ideas of one's work with those of other work or occasion. For example, Shashi Tharoor in his The Great Indian Novel uses names of characters from Mahabharata to refer to contemporary political personages. Or consider this poem Progress by Pater Menike. Man is mind, cried old Tancreds, and words was answered, man is hard down a new road, at last we come out our cry. Symbol, Greek meaning mark, sign, token, originally put together. A literary symbol is something that means more than what it is. Within a story, it is a person or an object or an event or an action or any other item that has a literal meaning but also suggests or represents other things by analogy or association. Symbols often exist by convention, such as zoo represents peace. These conventional symbols are used by writers, but they also create their own. It is important to remember that a symbol may have or more than one meaning, but the area of these possible meanings is always controlled by the context. The imprecision of a symbol make it both one of the richest as well as one of the most difficult of figures used. Of course, it depends upon how directly the writer uses symbolism. As for example, in the poem A White Rose by John Boyle O'Reilly, the red rose whispers of passion, and the white rose breathes of love. Oh, the red rose is a falcon, and the white rose is a dove. But I sent you a cream white rosebud, with a flash on its petal tips. For the love that is purest and sweetest has a kiss of desire on the lips. O'Reilly indicates clearly that the white rose is a symbol of spiritual attachment, while the red rose is a symbol of physical desire or passion. In the much performed play Look Back in Anger, John Osborne has shown the protagonist Jimmy Potter constantly reading newspapers and drinking cups of tea. Both acts are symbolic of the routine aspects of daily life. The ironing board used by the women has a similar symbolic value in the play. Activity 3. What is the difference between metonymy and synecdoche? Give at least 2 examples of each from your own reading. These should be different from the ones given in this unit. Second, gather by ye rosebuds while ye may. Old time is still a flying, and this same flowers that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying. The glorious lamp of heaven, the sun, the higher he is getting, the sooner will his race be run, and nearer he is to setting. Robert Hedrick. What do the rosebuds symbolize in the first stanza? What does the course of day symbolize in stanza 2? Based on difference, antithesis, Greek meaning opposite placing. Philosophically speaking, this refers to the second of the two ideas that oppose each other, an argument that contradicts an original proposition or thesis. In terms of rhetoric, it serves to bring out contrasting ideas by using opposite forms of word. One of the most famous examples of antithesis are the following lines from the Shakespeare's Hamlet. To be or not to be, that is the question, whether this nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take the arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. Here the idea of suffering or stoicism is placed against that of opposing or resistance. Here, the idea of suffering or stoicism is placed against that of opposing or resistance. Again, we can see the use of antithesis in William Blake's A Poison Tree. I was angry with my friend. I told my wrath did end. I was angry with my foe. I told it not, my wrath did grow, and I watered it in fears, night and morning with my tears, and I stunned it with smiles, and with soft deceitful wiles. Paradox, Greek meaning beside opinion. A paradox is a situation or statement that appears to be so self contradictory that it startles the reader into attention. Behind the seeming impossibility, once all the conditions and circumstances involved in the paradox are understood, a meaning or truth can generally be discovered. For example, John Donne's challenging of the power of death in his poem entitled Death is a striking example of use of paradox. Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. For those whom thou think it's thou dost overthrow, die not poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me. From rest and sleep, which but my pictures be much pleasure, then from thee much more must flow. Death is an end of to life, but here the poet is talking about death itself coming to an end, death dying. And sooner our best men with thee do go, rest of their bones and souls delivery, though slave to fate, chance, kings and desperate men, and dosed with poison, war and sickness dwell, and poppy or charms can make us sleep as well, and better than they stroke. Why swell thou then? One short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more, dead thou shalt die. The paradox most often quoted is that well known line by William Wordsworth, the child is father of the man. Oxymoron, pointedly foolish. This figure of speech is a special variety of paradox in which two opposing terms are brought together in what at first sight appears to be an impossible combination. There is nothing pointedly foolish in the combination, however, and oxymorons have been used to convey serious human perceptions about a variety of subjects, especially by poets. An oxymoron can occur in a phrase as well in a sentence. Shakespeare's Romeo utters several in one of his speeches. Why then, O braveling love, O loving hate, O anything of nothing first create, O heavy lightness, serious vanity, mishappen chaos, of well seeming forms, feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, sick health, still waking sleep, that is not what it is. I used to be indecisive, now I am not so sure. Always remember you are unique just like everyone else. Based on extension of ideas. Personification, from Greek meaning person making. It consists in giving the characteristics of human to animals, objects, or concepts to non humans. It is a kind of metaphor in which figurative term of the implied comparison is always human. What is an activity 4? What is antithesis? Write a 4-line poem using antithesis. Second, where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. Identify the figure of speech in this line and explain the use of which it is put. Look at the following oxymora. What do they mean and what is the contradiction they contain? A plastic glass, civil war, a small fortune, deafening silence, an industrial park, a sight unseen, a working vacation, loyal opposition, an open secret, old news, a fresh frozen pizza, cruel kindness, liquid gas. Based on extension of ideas. Personification. It consists in giving the characteristics of humans to animals, objects, or concepts to non-humans. It's a kind of metaphor in which the figurative term of implied comparison is always a human being. For example, in his sonnet composed upon Westminster Bridge, September 3, 1802, William Wordsworth personifies the city, the sun, the river, so that they become protagonists in the drama of everyday life. Earth has not anything to show more fair. Dull would he be of soul, who could pass by a sight so touching in its majesty. This city now doth like a garment wear, the beauty of the morning, silent bare. Ship towers, domes, theatres, and temples lie open unto the fields and to the sky, all bright and glittering in the smokeless air. Never did sun more beautiful steep in his first splendor, valley, rock, or hill. Ne'er saw I never felt a calm so deep. The river glideth at his own sweet will. Dear God, the houses seem asleep, and all that mighty heart is lying still. Closely related to personification is the figure of speech called pathetic fallacy, so called by Ruskin because it is a fallacy caused by an excited, overwrought state of feelings when the mind is borne away by emotions. It appears as if nature or inanimate object echo the feeling of man or show interest in human action, either by sympathy or by antipathy. The following lines by Pope serve as an apt example. Her fate whispered by the gentle breeze and told in sights to all trembling trees. The trembling trees in every plain and wood, her fate murmured to the silver flood. The silver flood so lately calm appears, swelled with new passion and overflows with tears. Hyperbole. Greek meaning throwing too far. This refers to overstatement or exaggeration, but with the purpose of expressing the truth. The effects vary from the funny to the grave, the imaginative to the practical, and from the persuasive to the unbelievable. Such expressions are called bombast when they appear as an inflated style of dramatic speech. Activity 5. Explain in your own words what you understand by personification. Read the following poem. Mirror. I am silver and exact. I have no preconceptions. Whatever I see, I swallow immediately, just as it is unmisted by love or dislike. I am not cruel, only truthful. The eye of a little god, four cornered. Most of the time, I meditate on the opposite wall. It's a pink with spackles. I have looked at it so long, I think it is a part of my heart, but it flickers. Faces and darkness separate us over and over. Now I am a lake. A woman bends over me, searching my reaches for what she really is. Then she turns to those liars, the candles or the moon. I see her back and reflect it faithfully. She rewards me with tears and an agitation of hands. I am important to her. She comes and goes. Each morning it is her face that replaces the darkness. In me she has drowned a young girl, and in me an old woman rises towards her day after day like a terrible fish. Sylvia Plath. In what ways is the mirror like an unlike person? First stanza. In what ways it is like a lake? Second stanza. Read the lines. Question number 3. There's been a death in the opposite house as lately as today. I know it by a numb look. Such houses have a way. The neighbors rustle in and out. The doctor drives away. A window opens like a pot, abrupt mechanically. Emily Dickinson. There's been a death in the opposite house. Can you can you gauge what the speaker's attitude towards death is on the basis of these lines? What is the figure of speech being used in these lines? Identify it. Fourth, to see her is but to love her, and love but her forever. For nature made her what she is and never made another. Burns. What figure of speech is being employed to describe her? What do you think prompts this usage? Based on obliqueness, irony. Greek meaning dissembling. This is a term with a range of meanings of all of which involve a discrepancy between what is said and what is meant. It should not be confused with sarcasm. It is a crude form of irony intended to cause pain. There are, broadly speaking, three kinds of irony. The first, verbal irony, is a figure of speech in which the opposite is said from what is intended. It is used with great effect to expose the follies and vices of people. Generally, the use of verbal irony implies that there is something in the speaker's tone and manner to show her real meaning. An example of such use of irony can be found in that noted speech of Mark Antony, where he says, "Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man." Julius Caesar. The reader, audience who has followed the play so far knows that Mark Antony means exactly the opposite of what he is saying. The second is dramatic irony, in which the contrast between what a character says and what a reader knows to be true. The significance of this form of irony is that it serves as a comment upon the speaker or the speaker's expectations. In drama, especially in Greek tragedy, from where dramatic irony stems, when the audience knows far more than a character, the irony in speech or action becomes significant to the audience. An apt example is at that moment in Odyssey when the enemies of Ulysses wishes a man good luck. The audience is aware that man is actually Ulysses in disguise. Appreciation. Auntie, did you feel pain falling from that willow tree? Will you do it please again? 'Cause my friend here didn't see. In the third irony of situation, the contrast occurs between appearance and reality, desire and its fulfillment, or between what is and what should be. For example, consider the situation that the mariner in Coleridge's poem, The Rim of the Ancient Mariner, finds himself in the middle of the ocean. Water, water everywhere, and all the boats did shrink. Water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. Euphemism. Greek original meaning words of good omen. Euphemisms alter the meaning and association that people have for concepts. They hide nasty, embarrassing, or scary facts and ideas by words that are more tempered and reduce the cruel or offensive or frightening effect considerably. For example, the use of pass away instead of die, which makes the concept of death easier to accept, or to call old people senior citizen or elders, which imparts a certain sense of dignity, or again to refer to the house servants as domestic help, which gives the worker a better feeling about the job. Such euphemisms serve a fair purpose and are thus a good omen. Euphemism differs from innuendo in that an innuendo is prompted by hostile feelings, but a euphemism is by kindly feeling. Sometimes euphemism simply obscures reality, as in references to the realities of war where a dead soldier is called a casualty or a bomb is called air-to-surface weapon. And indeed war itself is said to be a peacekeeping action. Tagore's short story Kabuliwala makes a touching use of euphemism when the Kabuliwala, on being questioned by a little girl after he is arrested, says that he is going to his father-in-law's house. He is euphemistically referring to prison. Years later, after he is released and comes to meet the little girl, he finds that it is her wedding day and he teases her about going to her in-laws' house. Ambiguity, doubtful shifting. It refers to the openness of language to different interpretations. In everyday speech, ambiguities are generally resolved by their context, but in literature, they can be a source of rich meaning, often creating complex ideas and thoughts. In fact, a piece of literature may be ambiguous in feeling, as in the stanza of Yeats, Sailing to Byzantium, where the tone seems to swing between celebration and condemnation. That is no country for old men, the young in one another's arm, birds in the trees, those dying generations add their song, the salmon falls, the mackerel crowded seas, fish flash or fold, command all summer long. Whatever is begotten, born and dies, caught in that sensual music, all neglect, monuments of unaging intellect. Pun, possibly derived from the Italian meaning fine point. A pun is usually a play on words where two distinct meanings are suggested either by the same word or by the two convey serious context. For example, Christ pun on Peter's name when he remarked that Peter was the rock on which he was going to build his church. Some people say that fleas are black, but I know it is not so, for Mary had a little lamb whose fleece was white as snow. At my birthday party, I had chocolate cake and cheesecake and fruit cake and ginger cake and fudge cake. After that, I had stomach cake. Fuzzy Wuzzy was a bear. Fuzzy Wuzzy had no hair, so Fuzzy Wuzzy wasn't Fuzzy Wuzzy. In Thomas Hood's faithless Nellie Gray, the effect of pun is semi-serious. Oh Nellie Gray, oh Nellie Gray, is this your love so warm? The love that loves a sacred code should be more uniform. Sacred code refers to uniform of the British soldier. Activity 6. The following lines from the first sentence of the novel Pride and Prejudice of Jane Austen. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of good fortune must be in want of a wife. What is the irony in this line? For a fuller understanding, read the complete novel. Jane Austen is well known for the abundant use of irony in her novels. Second, why do we use euphemistic language? Can you think of 5 euphemisms that we use in ordinary speech? John Keats uses ambiguity in the first line of Ode on a Grecian Wound when he says, though still unravished pride of Answer the following riddles. The answers are given below. What is the wettest animal? Second, how did the sailor know there was a man on the moon? Third, what do you call a very small mother? Fourth, when a lemon asks for help, what does it want? Fifth, why couldn't the skeleton go to the dance? Sixth, why do you call a sleeping bull? The answers are: first, the reindeer; second, he went to sea; third, a minimum; fourth, lemonade; fifth, he had no body to go with; sixth, a bulldozer. Based on utterance, very often units of sounds are repeated, especially by poets. Any unit, be it the vowel or the consonant sounds, the entire syllable or word or phrase or line or groups of lines may be repeated. This serves a variety of purpose, be it lending emphasis or sounding pleasant to the ears or giving structure to the writing. Alliteration. Latin meaning move letters. when the initial consonant sounds of a syllable, which consists of vowel sound that is either preceded or followed by consonant sounds, are repeated, it is called alliteration. The famous line from Macbeth, "Double, double, toil and trouble," is one such example of alliteration. As children, it was fun to repeat the alliterative language of Captain Haddock, the irascible character in Titan comics such as "Billions of Blue Blistering Barnacles." Assonance, Latin meaning "to answer to." This involves repetition of vowel sounds at close intervals such as mad as a hatter or free and easy. Consonants, Latin meaning "sounding together." The repetition of final consonant sound is referred to as consonants, such as in first and last, short and sweet, or the famous struts and frets of Shakespeare. Such repetition may occur alone or in combination. Alliteration and assonance may be combined in such phrases as time and tide, knit and kin, fit and as a fiddle, and thick and thin. Again, alliteration and consonance are combined in phrases like last but not least, good as gold, and crisscross. The combination of assonance and consonants forms a rhyme. Limericks or tongue twisters make good use of all three repetitions. For example, there is no need to light a night light on a light night like tonight, for a night light's light light on a night like tonight. Onomatopoeia, Greek meaning name making. Onomatopoeia means the use of words whose sound suggests their meaning, such as hiss, snap, and bang. Poets tend to use onomatopoeia more effectively than others, while pure onomatopoeia is rare and likely to be trivial. When combined with other devices that help convey meaning, it can achieve subtle and beautiful effects. Cosmic strips, of course, use onomatopoeia most effectively. Homophone, Greek meaning same sound. This refers to a word that is pronounced identically with another word but differs in spelling as well as in meaning. For example, wait, wait, see, so, mate, mate, taste, taste, and so on. Homophone also help to create puns. Activity 7. First, find any three popular limericks in English. Create one of your own. Second, what are the three repetitions that one uses in a limerick? Name some onomatopoeic words used in everyday speech. How would you use them in the sentence of your own making? Fourth, what is the difference between homophone and homonym? Give 4 examples of homophones not given in the text and make sentence to show the difference, the meaning between each set of homophone. Based on word building, Seamus is named after Greek letter she, indicating a crisscrossing arrangement of words. It means crossing over. This is a figure of speech in which the word order of similar phrases in sentence is reversed either by repetition of the same words or a reversed parallel between two corresponding pairs of ideas. For example, zebra question. I asked the zebra, "Are you black with white streaks or white with black streaks?" And the zebra asked me, "Are you good with bad habits or are you bad with good habits? Are you noisy with quiet times or are you quiet with noisy times?" Shel Silverstone. Acronyms. An acronym is a word where each letter of the word is the first letter of some other complete word. This is a form of abbreviation, and the interesting aspect is that the origin of such a word are forgotten and the acronym becomes in itself a new and independent word. For example, the commonly used TV for television ID for various forms of identity cards, or words like laser, which derives from light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. Perhaps the most used acronym is OK or OK, which derives, according to one theory, from all correct, a parody spelling of all correct. Palindrome. When a word or group of words reads the same backwards or forwards, it is called palindrome. For example, Malayalam or madam, I am Adam. These tropes and figures of speech should not be seen as the only formulae for good writing. The ones defined here are only the tip of the iceberg. There are so many others. However, to any writer, whether poet, dramatist, or novelist, a knowledge and application of such tropes and figures of speech allows the fuller expression of sense impressions. In turn, they evoke corresponding emotions in the reader. Thus, it is vital for a good writer to read and understand such literary tropes and figures of speech and use them appropriately while writing. Activity 8. What do you understand by charisma? In the poem Zebra Question, comment on how the sentence reversal changes the meaning idea completely. Second, find out the following acronym states stand for: AIDS, Posh, Cat, Air, Kiss, SWAT, Ed. Style and register. Human language is neither uniform nor unchanging. It differs not just from culture to culture but also from one speaker to another, whether in terms of pronunciation or choice of words or even the meaning of words used. It is important to recognize these language variations while writing. It lends authenticity to characterization. Formal and informal usage. Aspects of formal and informal language. Formal speech, standard language, euphemism, jargon. Informal speech, non-standard language, slang, colloquialism, taboo language. Depending upon the occasion, most of us shift from one language style to another automatically and unconsciously. In other words, the social context decides the nature of speech, whether one should use formal or informal speech. So, if the social context is in a way official or serious or governed by relationships of formality, where you are aware that not only what, also how you speak is of some importance, where there is a certain sense of consciousness about language, there formal speech occurs. Some examples of situations involving formal speech would be facing an interview, especially for a job, speaking to an important person in the Indian context, speaking to elders or distant relatives and acquaintances. Addressing a formal meeting as in parliament, though parliamentary language can be notoriously informal, indeed even foul if a verbal fight ensues, or speaking in a court of law. On the other hand, informal speech occurs when social situation is casual, friendly, and relaxed. In such situations, people are more at ease than in formal ones. Language tends to be spontaneous, rapid, uncensored, not always strictly grammatically correct, and often involves abbreviation, shortening, contraction, and deletion in informal context. Example of such social setting would include chatting with an intimate friend, a close-knit family environment, and other such situations. Most often, formal speech is equated with standard language, while informal speech is regarded as a deviation or non-standard language or even slang. Standard language refers to language that follows a certain standard of correctness or purity in what and how something is spoken. Non-standard language is generally considered to be irregular due to its lack of conformity with the prescribed format. It is vital to remember that such distinctions are only a reflection of social attitudes. No form of language is superior or inferior to another. In fact, slang, which is a part of informal speech, is one of the most creative uses of language in spite of the negative connotations that are associated with term. Like any other fad, slang changes frequently, and to use slang words that are outdated is regarded as being unfashionable. While some slang terms uniform the vocabulary of a particular social group, such as teenagers or the underworld or drug culture or pop remix culture, others are colloquialism, generalized term of informal speech. In certain sense, slang that caters to particular social group is like jargon, which can be defined as a specialized vocabulary that grows out of the special needs of particular profession. So one may use legal jargon, medical jargon, academic jargon, and even jargon related to jazz or rock and roll, etc. It all depends upon the field one is interested in. Sharing the same jargon promotes a feeling of solidarity within a group and excludes the outsider who is unable to speak or understand the jargon being used. Jargon then is both a part of formal as well as informal speech. In addition to slang and jargon, a number of words that often arise from slang are taboo words. Taboo language is one that is better avoided, at least in polite circles. It is a form of verbal abuse and includes swear words, insults, obscenities, profanities, and name calling. Sometimes euphemism replace taboo words, such as use of the expression F word instead of directly using the word F. Of course, taboo language is not always the language of obscenity. It refers also to a language that is sacred and not used outside a certain religious or magical context. Activity 9. In what category of speech would you place the following words, expression? Can you make sentences using these? Like first, awesome, second, chillax, third, damn it, fourth, paradigm shift, fifth, sound bite, sixth, genre, 7, good morning, please be seated, 8, long time no see, 9, pass away, 10, co-brother, 11, okay, tata, 12, party sharty, 13, respected sir, 14, homely convented girl, 15, crap. Varieties of English: dialect, regional dialect, social dialect, ethnic dialect. Idolite. Americans, Australians, and Asians, the British, all speak English, yet each of these groups differ noticeably in their speech. When groups of speakers differ perceivably in their language, they are said to speak different dialects of language. Dialects are governed by many factors: the regional, the social, and the ethnic, to name just a few. The regional dialect is the distinct form of language spoken in certain geographical area. For example, in England, one speaks of Yorkshire dialect on the ground that inhabitants of Yorkshire speak English that has certain linguistic features distinctly different from English in other parts of England. The social dialect is the distinct form of language spoken by people belonging to a specific socio-economic class, such as, for example, English spoken by hands or working class people in the Dickens novel Hard Times, as against the language spoken by educated upper class elite. The ethnic dialect reflect to the language used by people hailing from a common ethnic origin, such as Indian English, which is historically associated with the speakers of Asian Indian ancestry. Certain dialects in popular usage are looked down upon as being substandard or incorrect or even impure. Refer to the section on standard and non-standard English discussed a little earlier. Thus, Black English, or the English spoken by Black Americans, the very term is misleading, for it denies linguistic variations among speakers of Black English, has been labeled as non-standard, and in fact even called inaccurate. Once more, it would be pertinent to remember that it is social prejudice rather than linguistic judgments that lead to such viewpoints. Also, one should remember that often language variations between speakers cannot be linked to a region, social class, or ethnic group. Sometimes the term dialect simply implies that speakers show some variation in the way they use elements of language. In fact, no two speakers of a language, even when using the same dialect, use language in the same way. Every individual has a distinct speech or language pattern which informs the identity of the speaker. This language followed by an individual is called idiolect, and every speaker of a language has a distinguishable idiolect. In spite of such experience of dialectical and idiolectical variation, the fact we refer to English in this case as if it were a monolithic language in due to the fact of mutual intelligibility. This means that speakers of English not only recognize that they are speaking to the same language but also comprehend each other. Some language variants are understood by smaller, more specialized groups such as Pidgin, which is an example of language that comes into being when people who come into contact share no common language. This is typical of colonial situation where one group politically and economically dominates over the other and desires English word business and desires trade with the subordinate group. The word Pidgin is said to have originated from English word business as pronounced in Chinese Pidgin English. Pidgin languages have limited uses and reduced vocabularies and grammars as they are drawn by dominant language. However, they are still used in highly expressive ways. Hawaiian Pidgin English, Japanese Pidgin English, and Filipino Pidgin English are just some of the variations of Pidgin English. Sometimes, when Pidgin begins to acquire native speakers who use it as their primary language, it is referred to as Seroll language. This generally happens when the older people of community rely on a Pidgin to communicate with each other as they speak mutually incomprehensible native languages, but their children acquire the Pidgin as their first language. Thus, we have such a Seroll language as Gulaha or the Sea Island Seroll, spoken by descendants of African slaves living on the sea islands off the coast of Georgia and South California, and Hattian Seroll. When a Pidgin is serialized, there is a definite expression of vocabulary as well as grammar. Language variations also occur in cases of code switching and borrowing. In code switching, the speaker uses a mixture of distinct language varieties, whether for rhetorical effect or emphasis or fostering a feeling of community. In everyday speech, this occurs when speakers of one language borrow words from another language, or foreign words come to be used not as substitutions but as regular parts of the vocabulary. The commonly used curry and tandoori, which we recognize as words originally borrowed from Asia, are now vocabulary items listed in English dictionaries. For example, shampoo has been phrased thus in Hosborn Josborn, the Anglo-Indian dictionary. The word has now long been familiarly used in England. The Hindi verb is champi champna. The process is described, though not named, by Terry in 1616. Taking thus their ease, they often call their barbers who tenderly gripe and smite their arms and other parts of their bodies instead of exercise to stir the blood. It is a pleasing wantonness and much valued in these hot climes. The process was familiar to the Romans under the Empire, where the slaves employed in this were styled tractator and tractrix. Perhaps the earliest reference to the practice is in Strabo. But with the ancients, it seems to have been allied to vice for which there is no ground that we know in the Indian custom. In the multilingual communities, such code switching and borrowings as well as code mixing is spontaneous and inevitable. While code switching and code borrowing of language help to break barriers between people, it is also true that a lot in the way we use the language reflects our attitude or unconsciously imbibed prejudices. These tend to be perpetuated most significantly through language precisely because certain phrases, terms, etc., through constant usage become colloquialism and are such a routine part of our speech that one fails to observe the overtones. For example, Nuga Thuika, an African writer, observes that in his language the color white is associated with death or widowhood negatively, but when speaking in English, the common connection of white is with purity, peace, etc. Thus, the use of the word for white in any language reflects cultural bias.
Chapter 3, Modes of Creative Writing. Writing to communicate the writer and the reader. Writing is an act of communication, and while some of us may write for our own satisfaction, most of us write in order to read. In order to be read, the reader is our addressee and mirror. Therefore, while planning our work, we keep in mind that the possible reactions of this audience auditor who will determine the success or failure of the literary artifacts we create. If we agree that writing is a social act, then all writers write in order to share thoughts, ideas, feelings, experiences with others. The question why we write can be answered in a variety of ways for fame, money, or vanity. While on these While all these may be a part of the whole truth, a basic motivation for all writers remains the need to reach out to others through an expression of one's inner thoughts through the medium of language. As T.S. Eliot very pro- appropriately remarked, you write because you feel the need to free yourself of something, and this adds a psychological motivation and aesthetic compulsion to the act of writing. While all writing is creative, a difference can be seen in the kind of writing that informs and that which reveals or opens up the inner vistas of the mind and imagination. Depending on the content, the form is chosen, and the structure emerges from the manner in which the writer arranges the material. In addition to the structure, the other distinct signature of each writer is his style that can be explained as the handling of language that expresses the content in the best possible manner. For the aspiring writer, some essential preliminaries are: read extensively and with discrimination. Allow experience to mature. Write something individual and different, chart out of your own course. Keep a diary of course, thoughts and experiences that you can refer to. Visualize your course of work clearly. Try and achieve maximum clarity, precision, and directness. Be your own best critic and be open to the criticism of others. We talked about structure, form, and style, and the mastery of language. One of the important things to think about then is grammar. It would be constructive to see grammar as a mechanism which enables us to convert semantics, that what we mean, into utterances, what we say or write. The mechanism is part of a linguistic framework which, far from being clearly defined, is a fuzzy, notional thing that derives from our innate ability as human beings to communicate. Superimposed on it are the accumulated influences of the real world, and for some people, remembered remnants of tuition in English grammar. Recently, there have also been a change in the way language is thought and perceived, and the emphasis is on context and communication rather than accuracy and correctness. As a result of this, many writers, especially new entrants in the field, find themselves trapped in a kind of linguistic no man's land between the everything is permissible philosophy of modern language teaching on the one hand and stone clad prescripts of formal English grammar on the other. Adding to the writer's dilemma is the fact of English itself having taken on a number of cases and forms of expression that share a lot in common and are yet distinct. However, if we accept the premise that grammar is a mechanism that enables us to express what we mean, it can be said to be bad or good, right or wrong, depending on whether or not it functions efficiently and enables us to express what we mean, and also whether this endeavor is as effective for the reader who is trying to decipher our linguistic codes. For as E.B. White warns us, no writer improves his work until he discards the Set dual CET notion that the reader is feeble-minded, for writing is an act of faith, not a trick of grammar. If your primary goal is to If your primary goal is to reach out to an audience of readers, then your work must be readable. In the words of Anthony Trollope, of all the needs of book has, the chief is that it is be readable. Here are some of the ways in which you can make your writing accessible and enjoyable for a plethora of readers. Know your subject. To achieve clarity, you must know thoroughly and competently what you are writing about. Until your mastery of the subject is complete, you will not be able to decide about form or structure, and neither you be able to write this conviction. Be interested in your subject. Choose only those subjects that move you, for only if the writer writes with passionate conviction will the reader be moved. Be clear. While the reader should be engaged in the unraveling of the mystery of what you are saying, don't make yourself writing so opaque that it is accessible not to an audience of one yourself. Third, master the language you are using. It is only way by manipulating the language skillfully that great and complex thought can be communicated effectively.